On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the impact of the volatile geopolitical landscape on stability here on the Korean Peninsula. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, March 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Seoul and Washington kicked off their annual defense drills earlier this week, and Pyongyang has been quick to denounce them. For more on this, as well as the ongoing unrest in the Middle East, I have Shreyas Reddy with NK News live on the line. Shreyas, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Ban Kil-Joo at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy joining us virtually as well. Professor Ban, as always, it's great to have you on.
Hello, good to be here.
Shreyas, we'll start with you. Let's begin here in this part of the world, Shreyas, where South Korea and the U.S. have kicked off their annual all-domain military exercise, while the Trump administration, of course, also advances its military mission against Iran. Let's start then with the latest drill here and its timing, Shreyas.
Well, the annual Freedom Shield exercise, it was already scheduled before the Iran situation, of course, but takes on some added significance in terms of both the U.S. situation as well as the current situation on the Korean Peninsula. The drills began yesterday and they'll continue until the 19th. And they largely revolve around computer simulations and are designed to test the allies' joint capabilities while incorporating evolving war scenarios as well as different kinds of security challenges. Now, alongside these, there will also be a field training program, Warrior Shield. But one notable difference is this time the number of field exercises has dropped from 51 last year to 22. This appears to be aimed at reducing tensions with North Korea, but so far it doesn't seem to be working, as the North Korean leader, Sister Kim Yo-jong, has already condemned the drills as war exercises targeting North Korea. And they also reference the global security situation, saying that amid the collapse of the global security architecture at the hands of lawless international hooligans, referring to the US and its allies, these military demonstrations essentially are could lead to consequences too terrible to imagine. A veiled threat aimed at the US and South Korea. But from South Korea's perspective, of course, there are other challenges, other questions that remain, specifically with the U.S. Positioning a lot of its military forces in the Middle East. How much is it ready to really commit to these exercises? At this point, we haven't really seen details suggesting that there have been major changes or a decrease in the number of troops and activities involved. But certainly they seem to be a little scaled down in general.
Right. I'd like to expand on what Shreyas just talked about, Professor Ban. The annual exercise this particular year comes amid local speculation of U.S. relocating some of its assets from South Korea, from here in the Korean Peninsula, of course, to the Middle East. I wonder, Professor Ban, should we be worried about such speculation?
Well, national security cannot be guaranteed without any worries. In this regard, worries are not bad things because worries help upgrade security measures. Meanwhile, how to carry out the Freedom Shield combined exercise will determine whether this speculation is taken seriously or not, because Freedom Shield is aimed at upgrading combined defense readiness. In more detail, it would be more important to prevent Pyongyang's miscalculation simply rather than to prevent the relocation of some American assets of the Korean Peninsula. If Freedom Shield turns out to be successful without any noise, it should function as an effective measure for Pyongyang not to miscalculate the current situation. In contrast, if Freedom Shield were deadlocked for any reason, it could be interpreted as a weakening alliance between South Korea and the United States. In this vein, both militaries should pay tremendous attention to fulfilling the inherent purpose of this Freedom Shield exercise this year harder than in previous years. With this in mind, there are two important things that South Korea should put more efforts into. If American military assets stationed on the Korean Peninsula were to be relocated for the mission in the Middle East, those decisions should be made on the ROK-US consultation, not a unilateral decision by the United States. The high level of consultation should be made under the fundamental principle that those relocation is temporary, not permanent, which means that those assets are bound to be dispatched back to the Korean Peninsula once missions are done. In addition, which assets are going to be relocated needs to be reviewed by both militaries in an effort to ensure that those relocation does not weaken missile defense capability. The examination of missile defense readiness matters in a situation where, in the case of missile defense at medium and high altitude, South Korea should rely upon American assets such as THAAD. As of right now, South Korea is capable of independent missile defense readiness at a low altitude through several assets such as MSAM-1 and MSAM-2, as well as South Korea's own Patriot system. However, South Korea's LSAM, which is capable for missile defense at a medium altitude, has not been fielded yet.
Right, I see. I suppose we should also make note of the fact that the president himself, President Lee Jae-myung, he has reaffirmed his confidence in South Korea's defense posture, whether or not that particular relocation takes place. Shreyas, there's also media coverage here about prospects of North Korea's nuclear weapons drive deepening amid the strikes against Iran. What is this outlook based on?
Part of this is based on the parallels between North Korea's situation and Iran's nuclear development, of course. That's in the long term. But in the short term, there was certainly also a few reports highlighting Kim Jong-un's inspection of training exercises and launches of ship-to-ground strategic cruise missiles last week aboard North Korea's largest new warship. And this is something that Kim kind of emphasized, that the importance of the Navy's pursuit of nuclear strategic missiles or weaponry, and said that North Korea is making satisfactory progress toward this, suggesting that North Korea is very much pushing ahead with its integration of nuclear capabilities into its maritime forces. That said, I would also point out that these things aren't specifically because of the Iran strikes. This is largely consistent with North Korea's existing weapons development priorities, which came outlined at the recent 9th-Party Congress and has been continuing since the 8th Congress in 2021. That said, there still is, of course, an Iran factor. The current geopolitical context does drive home a certain message to Kim Jong-un, along with the killing of Iran's supreme leader, and in the context of last year's Operation Midnight Hammer, which disrupted Iran's main nuclear development sites. All of these combined would have reinforced Kim Jong-un's belief that the only way to preserve his regime is to have a nuclear deterrent. So, in short, the Iran situation doesn't necessarily change Pyongyang's view, but it does help reinforce what they have been working toward for decades.
Right. And Professor Ban, what are your thoughts? Speaking as a scholar, do you suppose the events unfolding in the Middle East have bolstered North Korea's commitment to its nuclear weapons program?
Honestly, the strikes against Iran would serve as a driver for North Korea to put more effort into being seen differently from Iran. To put it another way, Pyongyang will attempt to send a message that North Korea cannot be designated as the season 2 target for Operation Epic Fury. If so, how is Pyongyang expected to get things done? Well, there are two key assets for Pyongyang to achieve this objective. First, alliance, and the second, nuclear power maximization. When it comes to the factor of an alliance, Pyongyang is most likely to send a strong signal to Washington that Russia is strategically located behind North Korea. In 2014, 2024, North Korea and Russia formed a new treaty alliance, letting North Korean troops to support to be dispatched on the Eurasian battlefield. In return for the dispatchment of North Korean forces to support Russia, Moscow has been attempting to help North Korea rise to a recognized nuclear-armed state in the world, invisibly and indirectly, to say the least. To that end, in 2024, Russia neutralized the expert panel to grapple with North Korean sanctions while taking advantage of its status as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Moreover, recently, Russia has reportedly delivered nuclear reactors for North Korea's strategic submarines. This treaty alliance between North Korea and Russia is quite different from the close relationship between Iran and Russia. The fact that Russia supports North Korea in any scenario could serve as a strong deterrent for Trump not to carry out another Operation Epic Fury against North Korea. In terms of the factor of nuclear power maximization, Pyongyang has been highlighting its nuclear status under the fait accompli strategy as a nuclear-armed state. North Korea does not simply build nuclear weapons, but maximizes its nuclear arsenal. To top it off, Pyongyang has come up with a North Korea-tailored CNI, conventional and nuclear integration concept, and has been enhancing its second strike capability. In sum, unfortunately, the strikes against Iran have bolstered Pyongyang's calculation that nuclear weapons matters the most for its regime survival.
Right. Staying with that, Shreyas, an analysis by CNN says the events unfolding in the Middle East have set the stage for North Korea's Kim Jong-un to decide about how to engage with the U.S. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular analysis as well as your takeaways?
Sure. So the CNN analysis fundamentally talks about how the U.S. and Israeli campaign against Iran, as well as the U.S. operation that led to the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in early January, have shown how quickly regimes can be destabilized, how quickly authoritarian leaders can be removed. And CNN frames this as a warning to Kim. Now, one interpretation that came out in the analysis was that this could prompt Kim to consider reopening communication with Trump, even if only symbolically, to manage the uncertainty and reduce the risk posed by Trump's unpredictable mix of diplomacy and military force. At the same time, Pyongyang is likely studying the Iran operation to strengthen Kim's protection in more practical methods, seeing how do they manage to keep him safe from a potential decapitation strike. One factor, of course, that has to be borne in mind is, unlike Iran or Venezuela, North Korea does possess nuclear weapons and delivery systems. It has long believed that this serves as a deterrent against external intervention, particularly by the US. However, at the same time, the article does note that deterrence does not necessarily guarantee immunity, as the US has shown that with modern intelligence and precision strike capabilities, it is possible to break through even the most sophisticated defenses and overcome those threats. One factor, though, perhaps that the analysis does not touch upon in as much depth was that this situation has also shown Kim that Trump and the US may not necessarily be the most reliable partners for dialogue. They were negotiating with Iran before this, and mediators, at least according to mediators, Iran appeared willing to make concessions. So for Kim, there's now a big question. Should he try to mitigate damage by talking to Trump, or double down on the nuclear insurance for regime preservation?
Right. Staying with that then, Professor Ban, your thoughts. Do you think that dialogue between Kim and Trump are likely? And if that is the case, when might they take place? What might they discuss? And what do the two leaders look to gain from such engagement?
Well, in some sense, I am in line with CNN's views. To be more specific, North Korea's calculation could be changed, at least temporarily or tactically, because a massive military operation to target one of the axes of evil creates an imprinting effect. Pyongyang maintained a strong attitude based upon the logic of an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth in an aim to achieve the final objective of its nuclear program. However, Operation Epic Fury compels Kim Jong-un to choose a Plan B option, at least temporarily or tactically, by lowering the condition to sit at the negotiation table with Trump. In particular, Kim Jong-un could be concerned that he could be trapped in the logic of FAFO if he does not comply with Trump's request to sit at the table again in a situation where he has already not complied with his request last year. In the Ninth Party Congress, Kim Jong-un suggested that the United States recognition of North Korea as a nuclear weapon state should be the basic condition for him to sit at the diplomatic table with Trump. In the meantime, Trump says that he can sit at the table with Kim Jong-un without any conditions. When an imprinting effect is taken into consideration, Kim Jong-un could sit at the table with Trump even without United States recognition of North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. In this case, this is not going to be taken as a nuclear negotiation, but simply a friendship diplomacy between the two leaders. If this friendship diplomacy is made, indeed, Trump could create a favorable condition not to lose the midterm election greatly by highlighting significant diplomatic achievements. Kim Jong-un could also expect diplomatic gains because a bilateral meeting with Trump can serve as an opportunity for Kim Jong-un to be a recognized world leader. Meanwhile, if those gains are effective, this expected diplomatic interaction should be made before the midterm election. In this vein, the Beijing summit between Trump and Xi Jinping in late March could serve as a valuable opportunity for the meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. Beijing is not a bad option for Kim Jong-un as a venue strategically and diplomatically because China is a longtime ally of North Korea.
Right, indeed. And before the violence in the Middle East, quite a number of pundits had spoken about the possibility of an interaction between Trump and Kim Jong-un in Beijing. Shreyas, North Korea, it appears to be open to talks with the US, but opposed to such talks with South Korea. I've been asking our panel of pundits in our program over the past few days with regard to this reality. I'd like your take on it as well. Why the discrepancy? How do you explain it?
It comes down to a lot of different factors, of course, but perhaps a couple of key ones are the relative power that it sees in the US ability to make decisions and that Trump factor that we were talking about, that unpredictability. But if we go back, a lot of North Korea's current policies still stem back to the failed Hanoi summit in 2019, when talks between the US and North Korea broke down. And since then, Kim largely abandoned the idea that Pyongyang has anything to gain from engagement with either Washington or Seoul, and instead prioritized relations with longtime allies like Russia and China. But at the same time, there is this underlying belief that the US has the power to change long-standing policies against North Korea, both unilaterally and at global forums, whereas Seoul is unlikely to make major lasting changes without Washington's backing. And the other thing is, of course, it also may not have much impact, as South Korean changes of government often lead to much more drastic reversals of policies. When we're talking about the US being able to make those big sweeping changes, this is particularly relevant when someone like Donald Trump is in power, because Kim Jong-un appears to be banking on the fact that he is more likely than most US presidents to completely reverse Washington's long-standing policies, potentially make major concessions. But at the same time, of course, he is unpredictable, and I think Kim Jong-un will also be a little bit wary, but he probably recognizes that if there is to be a chance at getting something from the US, this may be the best time to do it. So for now, North Korea seems set to stick to its stance that it is not worth talking to either of these countries, for now at least, but it has left the door for Washington, the door open for Washington, if and only if the US completely drops the theme of denuclearization, or at least that is how they're framing it.
Right. Professor Ban, meanwhile, here in South Korea, the Unification Ministry last week called for a formal declaration to end the Korean War. Critics claim such a declaration will undermine deterrence. Could you explain this claim for us?
Honestly, we need to deal with this issue with three factors if deterrence is not going to be undermined. First, reality. Second, reciprocity. And finally, this calculation. First of all, we need to face the reality of how the Second Korean War has been deterred over the last 7 decades. A currently working armistice system encourages deterrence to work effectively, although it is not a final and permanent remedy for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Moreover, the transition from the armistice agreement to the peace agreement is not feasible for the time being in a situation where North Korea is reluctant to comply with even the armistice agreement. Furthermore, the declaration to end the Korean War could make the United Nations command weaker and dysfunctional because its key function is to monitor the Korean armistice agreement. In addition, a dysfunctional the United Nations command could lead to weakening the alliance between South Korea and the United States. Second, reciprocity guarantees peace and security. A unilateral declaration formally end the Korean War by South Korea could send a friendlier signal to North Korea temporarily, but easing tension could not be sustainable without North Korea's favorable response. To top it up, as of right now, North Korea is reluctant to sit at the table with South Korea by laying out a hostile two-state policy, as you noted earlier. Third, a lack of reciprocity could lead to North Korea's miscalculation. If South Korea hurries to take numerous unilateral actions just in an aim to mitigate tension on the Korean Peninsula, it could send a costly signal to North Korea. In this case, North Korea could take South Korea as a coward or a paper tiger, leading to military provocations. All in all, easing tension on the Korean Peninsula matters, but bolstering deterrence matters more. So how to mitigate tension on the Korean Peninsula should be made without undermining deterrence. By doing so, sustainable peace will be more possible and more expected.
Right, and hence the debate continues whether or not to declare a formal end to the Korean War. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Professor Ban, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
And Shreyas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.